So good morning. Welcome to Migraine. My name's Jeff Greenberg, and I'm a senior software architect at Pixel. I've been doing Drupal since D6 launched. How many of you here started with Drupal 8? Drupal 7? Okay. So you're going through the pain of the migraine?
Yeah. You want the question now?
Sure.
What's the thing that you found to be the most headache-inducing?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Yep. Very shortly. No, that's fine. If I didn't have a slide, I would have answered right then. I write some Drupal books, or wrote some Drupal books. I have a blog, The Accidental Coder. I'm on the docs team, Drupal.org, and I used to have a column with Drupal Watchdog before it was sold, but it's still online. So, migraine, the throbbing sensation behind each temple experience when daring to attempt migrating content from a content management system. You would think that there being content management systems that migrating content would come easily, but that's typically not the case. So, why is that? A front-end person, a back-end developer, and a designer walked into a bar and sat down and ordered a drink, the designer carefully tucking the cape under himself. The bartender walked over and heard them engaged in a friendly argument about whose role is more important. Of course, the front-end developer thought that hers was because that's what people see when they sit down to use the site. And the back end because if they didn't do their job right, there wouldn't be anything going to the front end to show. And the designer because, after all, the site's got to look good. The bartender listened for a moment, and then he stopped them and he said, "I think you're all wrong." And they said, "Really? Why?" And he said, "Well, take this bottle of beer." He said, "It's got a really great design." He said, "In terms of its functionality, it works terrifically in storing the beer inside it. And in terms of the presentation, it's great to look at." He said, "But all people care about is the content." So the leading cause of migraine is content typically. I'll give you another example. I'll give you some examples of issues I ran into and how I overcome them, but I'll also give you an example of what else besides content. So when you look at Drupal, just the overall functionality of it, most of it is core code. But when you look at what's involved in the actual presentation, the part that the user sees, most of that is not core code. Most of that turns out to be custom code in the way of contributed modules, custom modules, plugins, that type of thing. And that's where you run into the problem. Modules that have been migrated but function differently, for example, on D8 than they did on D7. Modules that have gone from contrib to core with no migration path to go from one to the other. And content types with field types that are very complex or defy migration. So if you're going to migrate a D7 article, out of the box vanilla article, to D8, slam dunk, no problem. You can just use the UI and you're done. But if you're doing something more complex, like migrating 35 views, it's just slam. There's no dunk because there is no migration for views. You have to recreate them. And if you have a site that's heavy in views, that's a lot of labor. So what we're going to go over are 3 particular headaches that I came across during a D7 to D8 migration. I'll recap each one and describe it, talk about considerations of how to approach it. Then I'll show you, probably in reverse order, I'll show a demo, so 3 live demos, and the code behind it. So the first one I call location frustration. Now, the types of issues I'm going to discuss you're going to encounter, but the particular ones you may not anymore because, for example, in this case, the issue was caused by the fact that we were migrating a content type with a location field. And at the time, I don't know if it's still the case, the location module was still in alpha for D8. So there was no migration path for that location field. We wanted a portable field structure so that we could take this field that was going to replace the location field and put it on any content type we wanted. And we should be able to migrate this in one pass. We didn't want to do a multi-pass migration. So the approach we decided to take is to use the address module, which is a contributed module, and to write a plugin to take the data from the location field in the D7 site and stuff it into the address record in the D8. So, if we take a look at the D7 site, I have 2 pieces of content. And the contact one has this location field. And that's what we wanted to be able to port. If we go to the D8 site, right now there's only this test piece of content that's a video piece. So let me go out and do the migration. Now if I go back and reload. Okay, so now I have the contact. And you can see down here, the address has been moved into the address field. So let's take a look at the code. So plugins go in the source directory. Drupal 8 is pretty particular about the folder tree, where things go. So in this case, we have a migrate folder, and we're doing a process on the migration as opposed to preparing data. There we go. So the business end of this is basically going out and pulling in the location rec. And stuffing it in to the address record. And that's it. There's not much involved in having a process plugin. One thing I'll tell you in that particular case as a gotcha is that you want to make sure you have identified the country with the address module, even if you're not particularly interested in the country. If there's no country, what happens is when you go in and look at the data, instead of looking like this, you'll have a box asking you to pick the country. So to avoid that, make sure you have one. Okay. So the next one, body double. For some reason on the D7 site, I wasn't around when this client had the site created for them, but they had a content type where in the body field, you can have the body text and the summary. Well, their summary text was a different field completely. And we needed to do a migration to merge that into the body field. Now, you think that would be a straightforward thing to do in a migration script, but it turns out that behind the migration script, the way it handles the body field is pretty much hard-coded. It won't let you define two sources for the body field. And it won't let you refer to the body field twice, like one says colon value and one says colon summary, to use two different fields to plug into it. So how to come up with a different way of doing that. The approach is to override the migration itself with a hook. In this case, hook migrate prepare row. And you're both familiar with hooks, right? Yeah. So migrate prepare row is your best friend when you're doing migrations. It allows you to jump behind the migration script and really massage the data in any way that you want. So taking a look at the demo again. We look at the D7 content. We see up here we have the body text in the body field. And then down below we have a summary field that has the summary text. And we want to end up with both of those being in a regular body field in the normal way. So migrate this one. And come back to the content list. Okay, so now we have an article. And we see that the summary is now in the summary text of the article, and the body is now in the body text of the article. So going to the code. Oh. Yeah. So here we have our hook, prepare row. And we do some checks to make sure this is valid. What we decided was that if there was body text and no summary text, that the body text would become the summary text as well, or vice versa. I don't recall. No. So we have a few if statements here to make sure that we're working with a valid field. And assuming we go through all that, we plug the summary field from the value field of the, so let me back up. We take the actual summary field, the field that's called summary in D7, and we stuff that into the summary part of the body field on D8. And we take the regular body field, which is the value up here, and that will go into the value of the D8 field as well. Very straightforward, great hook. It lets you do pretty much whatever you want. Third one, the pluribus unum, from many one. So the issue at this time was to migrate video meta from D7 to D8. And at the time, the video portion of the media module was not available. So we had to do something else. And again, this needed to be a portable solution where you could take wherever you were putting this meta as a field and attach it to any content type you wanted. So the decision was made to create a compound field. And also it needed to marry a caption file along with the video, which we'll take a look at too. So a compound field is like the body field. It's a field where it resembles an entity, and it in fact technically is an entity. And it has subfields within it. So the body field, for example, has the subfield value and the subfield summary that we just looked at. The way that you create a compound field in Drupal 8 is to have a field type as a plugin. And the field type that we'll see will appear in the list of fields when you go to add a field to your bundle. It's not really a field until there's an instance of it. So that's why the plugin's called a field type plugin. Then we'll populate the subfields in a migration script. So the first thing to look at is the plugin itself. There's three parts to a compound field or custom field plugin. There's the field type, which defines the field type. There's the field widget, which provides the information for the form that is used when you're populating the field once you've assigned it to your bundle. And then there's a formatter, where you can do things like pass information to a template, etc. I'm not going to really go into the formatter because we didn't do any particular formatting with this except turn it over to a template. But let's take a look at the field type. So this will probably look familiar. It looks very similar to the way a form definition does. These are each of the subfields that are going to be inside the field. And basically, it's meta information. Place to put the caption file. There was also a need to have a separate caption file for Spanish, so we had two fields. Below that is the schema information. So the way that it's going to be, the actual compound field or the entity is going to be created. And this, I can't stress enough how important it is when you're doing this, the IsEmpty. This tells Drupal how to decide whether this record is empty or not. And that's important for two reasons. If you didn't define it, it would always consider this to not be empty. And what happens then, if you picture being in a node add, and you have a field where you've defined that it can have more than one instance. Typically, you'll have a populated field at the bottom and then an add more button. Often you will have a blank field below that, ready for you to type a second instance into. If you haven't defined how to define empty, when you save your node, that empty second one will also be saved. And you'll start ending up with 2, 3, 4 of them, and you won't understand why, and it's because Drupal doesn't know that it is supposed to be considered empty. Conversely, if you define how to declare it as empty and you don't do it correctly, and it is determined to be empty when you don't really want it to be, when you do a save, and whether this is by going through the UI and saving the node or doing something in code, it won't be saved. And you'll be sitting there scratching your head wondering why you populated all the fields properly and you did a save, and then you go look in the database and nothing's there. It's because it determined it was empty even when it wasn't, because you told it the wrong way to determine it. So be very careful with the IsEmpty. The widget, again, is for defining the form that's going to appear, for example, on a node ad. So this is pretty much straightforward. We have each of the fields, the type, the title, default value, determination, the size you want it to be on the screen. Okay. In the the twig template, nothing much to say other than we are generating this and specifying the caption file, if there is a caption file. Oh, one thing I forgot, let me show you before with the location is the actual migrate script. Down where we have the destination as the field address, you see we refer to the plugin location to address, which is this plugin that I showed you. So that's the way you invoke custom code if you're not doing a hook. In the case of the split body one, we didn't need to do that because we're using a hook that gets called. But when you're doing a plugin, you have to invoke the plugin. Okay, so demo for, oh, and one other thing. Let me show you the caption file. So caption files are wonderful, aside from the intended use. They're wonderful for a bit of fun because you can basically take any existing video and specify a caption file for it. And it allows you to do things like, for example, take a wedding video and put thought bubbles behind the bride and groom and guests by way of caption. No, it's in here. Oh. Sites. There it is. And there's nothing to a caption file. Basically, you tell it the starting time and the ending time within the video, and then you put what your caption is in text with brackets around it. So let's take a look at this is what our video field looks like. Here is the form produced by that part of the plugin. And if we go look in the database, So this is what a compound field looks like. Let me stretch this out a bit there. So instead of having separate fields for each of these, which also makes it complicated to attach to another bundle, you'd have to do each one at a time. We have one record, just like an entity, and in that record, after the normal meta, we have the subfields. And that's where it'll put the values for that. And let's go here. Here's a test video. Captions turned on.
Good morning. Are you ready to get up and come out and play Drupal? We have a lot of work to do today. Oh. Where's your level assignment? Don't you want to work on a Drupal site with me? I really need some front-end help. Fine, I'll give you admin privileges. Come on.
There you go. Okay, so, oops. There. Questions?
So I'm basically, with the site that I'm trying to migrate, I'm in the modules stage. Going through, finding the modules, okay, whatever's got a composer, I'm copying over. And I'm having to do this in my spare time because they're not going to give up all the content changes they want on 7 just so you can migrate 8.
Right.
What I've found is, once I'm done with, and I've done like 8 modules so far, the biggest headache I'm anticipating is the twig. Taking our theme and getting it cut, because it's custom bootstrap theme, getting it over into 8. Content, I haven't even messed with yet. I just want to get the site built, and then I'll migrate 8 content. What we need is a migration to twig module, where it takes your existing theme, migrates it over to twig, and you don't have to be bothered.
That would be so nice, wouldn't it?
It would. That's kind of what they were telling us. Not necessarily that, but it was going to be so much easier to migrate when we were at DrupalCon in 2018.
Oh, we're going to have this great migration thing. It's going to make it so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the front end was what they had in mind. I heard something similar about how great Layout Builder was going to make life, and that didn't seem to be the case either. So going from PHP templates to Twig, I wish I had something I can tell you that was going to make your life easy. And let me ask, your PHP templates, do they have PHP in them? Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, and you've probably encountered this, at least it's a lot easier to do whatever processing you need to in Twig than it was in a PHP template in terms of specifying the field, getting the field from an array, looping through something, iterating through something. That's pretty straightforward in Twig. So at least you're going somewhat to easier in that. But in terms of a site that's heavy in templates, going to D8, yeah. I'm not saying that there isn't something that would help, but I don't have an awareness of it. And it needs to be a pixel perfect migration, of course.
Because they don't care about what the site is. They don't care about the back end. They really don't care about the front end. They only care that it looks the same. People can't tell when you migrate.
Looks the same and acts the same. Even more important, yeah. Yeah, that because, you know, your typical user, they're like, hey, I upgrade my phone from iOS 11 to 12 or Microsoft Word. Why is Drupal any different? Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, and hopefully 7 to 8 is going to be the last time for this, but unfortunately something like that is painful. And as I've mentioned earlier, if your site's heavy in views, that's painful. It maybe not so painful because the UI looks the same, but time consuming.
Yeah, you just have to build the views by basic build views manually.
Right. Right.
Once I get the modules and the, well, what I'm going to assume are going to be the tough part, or the easier parts. I'm trying to do this easy to hard for some reason. Doing the modules first. So I figure I'm going to need those. I've got like 80 or 105 trip modules, 40 custom.
Wow. Wow. Have you gone through the list already of the contrib?
Yeah, I'm working through it. And when I noticed with 8, it doesn't have contrib and custom anymore. It has modules.
Yeah, you can put the subfolders in. It doesn't care. But what you will find in some cases, possibly depending on which contrib modules you're using, is that they've taken the opportunity in moving from a D7 version to a D8 version to beef it up, and sometimes that means the parts you were using don't exactly work the same. So be warned of that. Yeah, I'd say the first step, well, the first step is to go through the list of what exists in the way of content types, custom fields or contributed provided fields, and decide if there's anything they don't really need anymore. You know, what aren't you using? Here are all the things that were in your site. What aren't you using? Now, there's a slight danger in that because you might get an answer. Oh, I didn't realize we had that in the site. We should start using that. So it's something to weigh, but because you might be able to cut out some of the need for the migration.
My first thought is I'm going to go through, find out what's there, and then see how the site functions without once I'm done with that. So if they've taken a module away, oh well, we'll see if it works.
Right.
If we have to, we'll build it as custom.
Right. Now the content types could drive the need for some plugins or modules that you don't currently have. Then going through the list of contributed modules could also drive the need for custom modules that you weren't counting on because, you know, it's open source, so people didn't have time, they didn't migrate their module, or they felt that D8 took care of it, it was no longer needed, but D8's not taking care of it in the same way that D7 did with their module, and you have to do the gap, fill the gap. So those are things to watch out for too. So D7 to D8, even with a lot of modules, could be not all that painful, or with almost no custom code, could end up being very painful. It's very hard to tell until you see what the functionality is that's required. D9 is supposed to be the same as D8, other than deprecated code going away for the most part with new features.
So it's kind of like going from PHP 5, 6 to 7.
Right, right. Hopefully.
Yeah, we already went through that.
Yeah. That's the promise, at least. Anything else?
You got to say that was built. It's mostly one content type. After I took over, there's more. I started adding more content types. But the main one is just the base Drupal article content. But there's several different types of articles. But whoever originally built the site added in a box where you can choose a different type of article, like a news article, research article, and stuff like that. Those, those should all be separate content types. So, have any advice for migrating for one content type at D7, D8, I want it to be multiple content types.
And could I ask why you want to do that?
Well, it seems to make more sense to me that it should be, instead of an article being, instead of having like the different one article, because they're all displayed the same. I think they originally did it because they just wanted one form to fill out, but it's this huge form that they have to scroll through, and every section for different types, it's like they choose a type, scroll down to where they want to fill out the news type, and then fill out those sections and save the form.
Gotcha.
So it really needs to be, all those need to be different content.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense then. Which you're right, that is kind of unusual. That if you could have different fields, you should have different content types, pretty much. So offhand, I would say my suggestion would be just to have a separate script for each destination content type. So basically, your source would be the same. It would be the article, but it would be chosen based on the value of that field that determines what type it is. And then the destination would be the new content type. So it's just copy and paste, really.
You know, you can modify the form so that it only shows the parts that they say content type, put an article type, and then change the form to that. Then you don't have a lots of form. You have essentially 4 separate forms.
Yeah.
That's how I would.
No, well, I really just want to run out. I really want to get rid of CTA. Mess around with 57 site too much.
No, I think what he's saying is that in D8, if you wanted to keep it as one article content type, you could just write some code to hide.
You're gonna put code actually use a lip form.
Yeah.
It's got built in. I shows. I mean, lip form is the most amazing tool I've ever found because it's got all the JavaScript built into it. You don't have to rewrite the form.
Yeah, forms are a lot of fun, aren't they?
They can, and they can be really intense, and you can just look so good, and really it's all built in. You just click here, click, and you're done. Now we had one called Common App. If you're familiar with colleges, they came up with this plan that you fill out one form, and it goes to all the colleges you want to apply to. But the college has to pay for the form. Well, one of the schools I was at, they decided, no, we don't want to pay for it, but we want the exact same form. We rebuilt the entire form, all the functionality, everything in it for that one college.
Any other questions? No? Oh, what? So I wanted to mention that Bixel is a digital transformation company, about 120 people. It's based in Virginia, and we're in growth mode. I'm a remote employee for it, and if you're interested, you can contact Bixel or me and look into it. One good thing about it is that you, as a remote employee, there is a perk you don't typically get, if depending on your lifestyle, if it's a perk, and that is bring your pet to work, whether it's a dog, cat, emu, whatever.
Yeah, I love remote work. Somebody was saying yesterday they go to the office, I guess once every 2 weeks, and it's like, yeah, that's when I'll switch out my pants, and I said, what's pants?
Yeah, right.
Although now my wife works from home also, I do get a little more rest.
Yep, waist up. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much.